The Control 2802 is a small format analog console with DAW control on board. It combines an array of high-end analog features with digital control to form the heart of the modern professional project studio, with capabilities you expect to find only on large format consoles. Now that we know what the Control 2802 is in a general sense, I'd like to go into some more detail concerning the many powerful features this console has on board, as well as how it can integrate into your current setup and greatly enhance your workflow. To start with, the Control 2802 features 8 high-quality Class A microphone preamps and a high-performance mix bus with extended bandwidth high-frequency response up to and beyond 120 kHz. So whether you're tracking or during mixdown, you'll enjoy the incredible sound quality usually only found on consoles costing much more. Next, you've got a 32-input summing mixer, which allows you to take your mix out of the box. So if you're someone whose workflow typically consists of working in the box, you now have a very powerful option for stemming your mix out and going through the high-end analog circuitry of this console. Next, we have a fully featured monitor section on board, which is very useful whether you're trying to build custom headphone mixes, utilize the solo in front feature to tune up vocals, or just simply A/B different sets of speakers. Another very powerful feature is the DAW control on board featuring dual layer technology. This enables you to seamlessly, with the press of a button, switch between analog and digital control. With that in mind, the Control 2802 also features 8 motorized ALPS faders capable of writing both DAW and analog automation. Not only does this enable you to access the full functions of your DAW's automation capabilities, but you can do rides in the analog domain, whether it's volume or mute, all of which is totally recallable with your session. You've also got a stereo mix bus compressor with built-in parallel compression on board. The benefit of this is that you've got a high-quality analog stereo mix bus compressor to help you achieve punchier, more dynamic mixes. In addition, its patch points are available on the back to be able to utilize it on one or a pair of the main channels. Next, I'd like to take you through a few examples of how to integrate the Focusrite Control 2802 into your setup. The first example I'd like to take you through is how to connect the 2802 to a 32 output system to utilize its analog summing mixer to its fullest extent. We've got our first audio interface, which consists of 8 outputs going to the DAW input DB25 connector on the back of the 2802. This is typically your first 8 mixdown inputs on the console. Then we're taking the optical out of our interface, in this case a Sapphire Pro 40, and going into an 8-channel preamp with light pipe input, utilizing it as an A to D, or actually D to A converter. From the analog outputs of that device, you will now be utilizing the channel line inputs, also known as alternate inputs, when utilizing the alternate input feature available on each channel fader. We have our second audio interface with 8 analog outputs, and that would typically go to the summing input DB25 connector on the back of the console. These would interface with your effects returns, which give you 2 stereo pairs, but you also have the DAW mix input as well as your mix bus insert, which can be easily assigned to the main mix to give you a total of 32 inputs at mixdown. In the second example, I'd like to detail how you would connect the 2802's mixdown inputs to an I/O setup that consisted primarily of DB25 connectors, such as our upcoming RedNet range and Pro Tools HD interfaces. For our first interface, which consists of 16 inputs and outputs, I've also included a tracking recording path. So the way you would access that is to connect a snake to the Control 2802's direct output DB25 connector going into the first interface's 8 inputs, first 8 inputs. When it comes time for mixdown, we would utilize the first 8 outputs going again to our DAW input connector. Second 8 would go to our channel line ins, again in alternate input mode, available at a press of a button. Our third 8 would be coming from our second interface, going to the summing input, again DB25 connector. And finally, for our last 4, you've got your 2 stereo effects returns, as well as an additional 4 available at the push of a button, DAW mix inputs, and mix insert returns. And now I'd like to take a look at the software aspect of setting up the Control 2802 in your studio with your favorite DAW. So if you're a Pro Tools user, there's a couple of windows you'll want to familiarize yourself with. First of all, you want to make sure that the Control 2802's 2 ports show up in Pro Tools' MIDI input enable setup window. These consist of the automation port and the control surface port. The automation port is important for when you're doing analog automation. The control surface part relates to all DAW related features. Next, you'll want to go over to the Pro Tools Peripherals setup window. This is where you go to configure and set up the Control 2802's DAW control capabilities. So you would first choose Huey as your control surface protocol, and then simply choose from the list that pops up Control 2802, Receive and Send. Next, let's move on to Logic. Very simple setup here. You simply go to the Logic's control surface setup window, where you go to configure and set up the Control 2802's DAW control capabilities to work with Logic Pro. The 2802's DAW control port for input and output, and you're all good to go. Finally, I will touch on the last 2 major DAWs that the 2802 supports, Cubase and Nuendo. You simply go to the device setup window and choose Huey, and then simply choose your MIDI input and output ports. We've covered just a few of the many incredibly useful features of the new Focusrite Control 2802. A powerful production tool that enables you to take your sound to the next level. It's also important to remember that if you were to separate out all the features and functions that this console does into separate components, you'd spend at least 2 to 3 times as much the asking price. As if all this functionality wasn't enough, the Focusrite Control 2802 also comes bundled with a generous software package including the Forte Suite and the Midnight Suite, allowing you to polish up your mix using compression and EQ modeled after classic Focusrite hardware. And that's the Focusrite Control 2802 at a glance. Small format console, big studio sound.
You better believe that I'm coming back and coming back so strong. Better believe, 'cause they say I can, it won't be too long. You better believe that the tears and pain have all gone away. Better believe it's more than a claim that I came to stay. Better believe. Yeah.